Hi, I'm Stuart Cochrane, if I've been bad, or Stu Cochrane if I've not. This is
Nikhil Dummer, also from JLL. Stuart, do you want to perhaps say your role and then I'll do mine?
Yeah, sure. So I guess I set our sustainability ambition within our workplaces in JLL. So I look after our corporate real estate. That's 14 offices in the UK and sort of 10 smaller residential offices. Driving our sustainability agenda, how we reduce our negative impact and maximise our positive impact, and circularity is one of the key enablers to that agenda.
And I'm an architect by profession. I've sat in multiple roles on our workplace projects, initially as lead designer on a few projects, and then more recently moved over to the client side to act as client design advisor and try and act as a bit of a translator between our design teams, taking some of the aspirations and intentions from a client perspective and translating those to and from to try and streamline the process. And one of the things I think we're going to be talking about is iterative learning and taking lessons learned from one project and ensuring that they're carried through to the next.
In other words, you communicate my requirements in a language designers can understand, right? Let's make this interactive. I'll talk. When it gets boring, stick your hand up and ask me a question that makes it less boring. We operate in a sector that's got real impact. The built environment, roughly 40% of global emissions, hugely linear in its consumption of raw materials, as Annie was alluding to. Research back in '95 suggested 3 billion tonnes of raw materials. I mean, it's just staggering numbers. It's probably closer to 4 billion tonnes now. We're still building at scale. So we're part of a world that does a lot of harm, and we need to work out how we break that. The circular economy, as I said, it's a real enabler for us. The principles of the circular economy called out in terms of eliminating waste, locking in that energy that's been put into products in the first place. But then the bit that's often missed is, how are we going to unpick the kind of damage to the environment that the linear economy has done? How are we going to give nature the space to regenerate and therefore sequester carbon that we've been pumping out into the system? We've worked with Crown for a number of years in various different guises, including business in the community, part of the Circular Economy Task Force. They're a supplier to JLL. They've been on a journey with us, which I would like to talk about now. For me, it's really important that we position this as we're telling our story. We're not making claims. We're not setting ourselves up to be the answer to all the problems. We just want to share our story, our learnings, and be challenged by you guys.
That's successes and where we've come against some challenges that frankly we can't solve on our own, and it needs to be an industry-wide effort.
Yeah, absolutely. Within the UK, we set a net zero aspiration back in July 2019. We absolutely embed net zero into our corporate real estate strategy through leasing arrangements, where we've got to come out of a space and move somewhere else. How we address our operational carbon requirements as part of that process, as well as a bunch of other things that I'm going to kind of allude to a bit later on in the presentation. But how we can address what is a kind of a material kind of carbon bombshell that's not really being spoken about properly in the industry at the moment, and seek to address the carbon intensity of our fit outs, looking to halve that by 2030. These are really big ambitions. And we're definitely on that road. Here's the kind of journey that I said we've been on. Back in Manchester was the kind of first step on that journey, and the first time that we applied business in the community circular economy fit out guidance. We'd been part of the development of that alongside Crown and others, and it was really informative. And I think the big lesson learned from that one, which I haven't captured later on, is have a go. Until you actually have a go and start this, you won't know what the problems are that you need to solve. That spat out just a phenomenal amount of learnings that informed what we did at our 20 Water Street project in Canary Wharf. It's a project we're incredibly proud of. It won the Circular Economy Innovation Award at ED last year. And we, as a business, we haven't had a great track record in terms of walking the walk in terms of our own corporate real estate. So it was a bit of a switch moment for our business.
I think so, and it was coupled with the fact it was also nominated for a BCO award, and we're trying to balance sort of what a corporate occupier client might want in terms of look and feel, but also trying to match that with sort of the quantitative element of reducing our footprint.
I'm not going to get into the weeds of all the targets, but to speak to the operational carbon element, we're absolutely applying the kind of carbon hierarchy within the Advancing Net Zero framework. So measured data, reduce your energy load, high quality renewables, offset where you can. We're committed to getting to net zero without offsetting as part of our agenda in terms of operational carbon. We also have some certification targets. That brings other challenges, and how you kind of marry up those sometimes aligning, sometimes conflicting requirements with circularity, with inclusive design, but more on that later. So, what we're seeking to do, address net zero in operation, but also address embodied carbon. Quite quickly, we kind of lent into the fact that we needed to develop some new knowledge, some new tools to help us do that. And we're very lucky at JLL, and constantly standing on the shoulders of giants, that we've got some fantastic internal capability in terms of our sustainability consulting colleagues, but also our net zero carbon design team. One of the first things we developed was a tool to kind of create a data-driven market appraisal of which assets we wanted to be in terms of alignment with our net zero agenda, but also with our well-being agenda. We also had to develop tools, because there's no industry standard approach on how you address embodied carbon in tenant fit out. We've applied the RICS whole life carbon assessment and then tailored it to tenant fit out. And then off the back of the Manchester project, we've developed our own proprietary JLL low embodied carbon and circular fit out guidance, which we give to our design teams to help inform them how they can reduce embodied carbon in our fit outs.
I think it's worth saying, sort of with the top one, very early on we realised that the choice of space is half the battle. That was really critical to achieving our outcomes and objectives. The net zero carbon standard seems really developed in terms of architectural thought, but less so on fit out. It just seems to lag behind a little bit, so we really needed to push on that one. And then in terms of the guidance, I think Stuart and I probably bashed heads for about a year, sort of going through the detail. Well, what does this mean? What's your hierarchy? How are you making decisions? What do we need to respond to as a design team? If you can empower us, if you can help us understand what you want to achieve, we can come to you with suggestions rather than questions, and that improves the whole process. I think one of the key things throughout all of this is the importance of collaboration across an entire project team, not just within a design team, but everybody sort of needing to front load their efforts, because it has exponential benefits as you progress through a project.
Yeah, it can't be client and supply chain. You have to work together collaboratively, or it breaks down very, very quickly. Next set of things that we've done as part of this story is, rather than just measuring our performance at the end of a project, we're starting to put time into the program now where we can do effectively design stage assessments against both our operational energy modelling. So this is the latest one at Leeds, where we're designing to the 2030 UK GBC energy use intensity targets for tenants. So very much kind of best practice in the market at the moment, I think, to benchmark that. Somewhere between 90 and 110 is typical energy use intensity in the corporate space at the moment. It's really, really difficult. You have to make energy-led design choices quite early on in the process in terms of how you organise your space to optimise for that.
Stuart, just on that one, again, front loading, it's really important to explain the impact of some of these decisions to key stakeholders early on to get their buy-in, because you get asked those questions midway through the design and the whole thing slows down. Another point in terms of why we're doing stage-by-stage assessments, one could argue that we're sort of increasing cost in terms of consultant time and just time spent doing this, but what does it allow us to do? One, check our own progress. From a client perspective, we understand how we're tracking, but also it allows us to review and understand where there are failings and challenges along the way that we might want to seek to address the next time we do a project.
Yeah, good count. And same principle for embodied carbon. So this is probably a little bit more organic than the operational carbon design process, in that we can actually test our designs for carbon during stage 2 and stage 3. It may be things that inform how we lay out the space. Like if you move that room to there, you can actually reduce embodied carbon by locating it next to the core because you're building one less wall. So some really pragmatic stuff, but also coordination with the engineering services, the things that deliver light, air into the space. How you optimize those two worlds. Often they align, sometimes they don't. Leeds is the latest project. I guess the other thing that's really interesting here is that probably different to a building, every tenant fit out's got its own scope. You know, sometimes you'll go into space and be like this, it's got a suspended ceiling. Sometimes we'll go into a building, there's not a raised access floor. So the scope of your project and the carbon that's associated with that has to be tailored, and therefore we've set some business rules that allow us to kind of baseline for a particular project, and then we measure our progress against that baseline. Happy to talk more to that later. It's a little bit kind of nuanced. So what we tell our colleagues, I think the change management piece that Nicola alluded to is really, really important. Had a conversation today with a stakeholder in Leeds, really worried about kind of what second life task shares was going to mean. It's really important that circular or second life doesn't mean second best, and how we position that during the design process and the stakeholder engagement process with our colleagues. And
we've really had to push our design team. And I've learnt this sort of by doing it and then sort of realising what we need to do, is to change the language that they are using to explain design decisions. And it's not just on the basis of aesthetics or even durability, but we had to develop internally a decision-making appraisal matrix almost, one to empower the design teams, but also it helps us to explain what the logic and thinking is behind certain decisions, which can then be played out to wider stakeholder groups, decision makers, but also the people that inhabit our spaces. Why is this like how it is, and so forth?
Some of this is subjective, and yeah, we'll take feedback on whether you like it or not, but we are quite big fans of this exposed services design, the industrial look. You see it quite a lot in the corporate world now, but there's materiality in this decision making as well. You don't put a suspended ceiling in, you're literally saving tons and tons of carbon. That links to some other strategies that we have to deploy in the fit out. That, you know, acoustic performance of those spaces is really important, not just for our colleagues, but also for clients coming into the space. So how we deal with acoustics via the raft where there isn't a suspended ceiling, that presents a new design challenge. Furniture solutions for small meeting spaces. You know, these pod furniture rooms, you can disassemble them in 4 hours. Anne, I think, is that right?
I don't actually do it, believe it or not.
Do you not? You do everything else, right? But embedding that kind of end of first life thinking into your design process, that you treat these things as assets rather than things that you've got to dismantle and put into a skip at the end of your lease. We're also consolidating space like the whole industry is at the moment. Spaces can't just do one job. That flexibility, reconfiguration it comprises part of the design narrative as well.
Yeah, and like everything, there's no hard and fast rule. There are certain instances where you can't do that, and there's nuances and decisions that have to be made along the way in terms of what are you willing to negotiate on, what do you have to hold dear, and how do you communicate that?
Circular furniture package, we'll skip through that, but generally 80% of our furniture in our fit outs is second life, either reused from our estate or remanufactured or procured from Anne and colleagues. Where we have to buy new, we're obviously looking at longevity, high recycled content, and refurbishment cycles alongside those products. Say more about what's coming next. The materials piece is really interesting. people are less engaged, and unfortunately, in kind of remanufactured furniture, but they love materials with a story. So that waste into wonder, post-industrial plastic waste turned into a worktop, people really engage with. To that point, Nicola, you may be better talking to some of these things than I, but I mean, ultimately, we're trying to reduce our footprint in our product selection. Reduce
the footprint, sort of taking into account storytelling, because as Stuart mentioned, that's a really big part, and that's something quite tangible for a lot of people. It was mentioned on the previous slide about natural content, so bio-based materials, and knowing that sequestered carbon and what that potentially means at the end of a project. How long do we have left, or is that time? Okay. So we're looking at things such as timber. Can we move away from using steel frame internal partition systems and gypsum plasterboard to bio-based alternatives? Acoustics, what are we doing on that front? Stuart mentioned exposed soffits, but also within rooms, recycled PET has been there for a long time, but what are we doing, or what are we looking at in terms of things like mycelium, which again, it's something people can touch and feel, and they relate to that. What can we look at that's sequestering carbon in terms of its operation? So algae is something that we were looking at on a recent project. How could that contribute to capturing carbon dioxide, but also producing oxygen, and have that as a material that tells a story within the space, using it rather than just something that sits on a shelf? Lots of interesting stuff in that space.
Obviously, the space is going to look a bit different, but people are coming to the office for a different reason now. You're not coming in to sit at your desk post-pandemic, you're coming in to collaborate either with your colleagues or your clients. So the spaces have to speak to that use case as well. The principle of spaces having to work hard. In the design process, we're asking for what's the primary, secondary, tertiary use of this space? How's it going to reconfigure? What other spaces do we need in our office to make that work? So if we're decanting furniture, for example, from one setting for a big client event, where's it going to go? Been an interesting challenge.
It has, and it sort of reminded me of something that you said earlier on in terms of the real estate being quite linear in its sort of nature. I suppose we're also having to change our way of thinking, which has been predominantly linear, and having to think in multiple strands rather than a single strand. Which has been a challenge, and some people are further along that journey than others, but we are seeing a gradual shift from a design perspective, at least, not just interior architectural design, but the full scope of design teams are now sort of very much on board with that. Certainly the ones we're talking to.
Carbon tunnel focus, right? Real risk for everyone. Our offices have to be spaces where people thrive, not survive. So we can't make them so puritanical that no one wants to come in. I kind of alluded to this earlier, but we've got multiple requirements on our projects. Some of them are linked to certification. There are parts of our agenda where things work really, really well together. So inclusive workplace design with nature, biodiversity, social value. They're quite happy bedfellows. Delivering kind of energy efficient, low carbon in operation workspaces often butts heads with some of the requirements in certification, but also in terms of inclusion. So how we manage that is quite challenging. And we haven't nailed it perfectly yet, but we just have more data that helps us make decisions. We're designing workspaces for everyone, not just the JLL population today, but for wider UK society. But like any cellular space, especially one that's kind of relatively underutilised, the business asks questions around that. Why are we putting all these spaces in there if hardly anyone's in there? Well, it's like someone might need to use it one day because we might employ someone who wants that space. But to keep it simple, you build walls, you put on a door, you need to deliver air and you need to deliver lighting. You're putting embodied carbon and energy into cellular spaces. We try to keep it as open as possible, but there are some rooms that you just need.
And it sets a marker in terms of where we want to be as a business tomorrow rather than just what we're doing today.
It's not all butting heads. Some of it's sort of synergist, as Nicola was saying earlier. Health-led design, bio-based materials typically don't have harmful chemicals in them. So how we deliver really high quality air to our colleagues, how we make the most use of natural light to reduce the energy load we put on lighting, how we deliver acoustic comfort, but also neurodiverse design as well, with kind of dedicated quiet spaces away from the madding crowd. There are areas of it where it comes together quite nicely.
And we want our materials to do more than one thing as well, in the same way that we want our spaces to do more than one thing. So where it can be a natural material and have a secondary benefit, absorbing certain VOCs, for example, great. But we can work with that.
I guess lessons learned, Nicole's alluded to some of this already, so I won't necessarily repeat it, but have big ambition. Please do have big ambition, but just be cognizant of the risks and challenges that come with that ambition. From a design point of view, definitely shifting from what do we want to achieve and finding products to fit it, to designing with stuff that's already in existence. You can't do everything. Balance risk of that delivery with the materiality of the impact of that design choice is one of the key lessons learned. And start with what you have. Like, default approach now before we start any project is an asset audit of what's in place. That goes beyond furniture. It includes things like worktops, lighting,
door sets.
Yeah.
And thinking about what we can use beyond just its initial use case. So a door leaf, could we turn that into a table, for example?
This is really interesting. It's required a shift from our project management teams as well. You need more time in the programme for certain things, or more emphasis in the programme for certain things earlier. The procurement also needs to kind of recognise that it's not like placing an order and in 6 weeks you get it. Sometimes it's saying, we need a cut-off date, finding this product from the secondary market, and then we'll place a new order. So the programme just has to reflect that. The earlier the contract's engaged, the better. You'll just find more opportunities. It's about communicating market signals and then asking that market supply chain to respond to those.
To work with you on that.
Yeah. It's important to tell our story as well. I mean, it's kind of why we're here today. There's kind of business IP in this, but we believe that we have a purpose in addressing carbon as part of the built environment. We work with a number of industry partners. This group here is growing. The circular materials, circular construction sector is growing in a really exciting way. And we shouldn't hide from the fact that there are OPEX and CAPEX benefits that can be had from this approach. Sometimes it's cost neutral. It can be cost a little bit more sometimes. But it's about having the data to make those informed decisions. And then what next? I won't read through all of these, but clearly sort of focus on reuse. The kind of more passive materials is a bit Wild West at the moment. So things like raised access flooring, ductwork, it's a bun fight for stuff out there rather than an established market. But I think we have to recognise that market's going to come at some point. Shifting the dial towards urban mining. So engaging with our project teams, our wider supply chain, to get visibility of projects that might feed ours as they're getting stripped out, so they're going to waste. We can design around that stuff moving forward. And then the now problem that Nicola and I are leaning into is like trying to find a material passporting solution that's fit for purpose for a tenant space, and then defining and aligning our building information model data requirements to make that world come together.
And that's a big challenge, relating to sort of the PM approach and where that's locked in a design process, how you're engaging your design team partners, how you're engaging a contractor, explaining all this up front, and having time to take feedback, tweak, align, modify, because it will be bespoke to every single project for the moment. Even though you're trying to get to sort of a common language, it still needs work to get there.
And from a personal point of view, the thing that excites me most, well, the urban mining does excite me, but the bio-based materials sector, I'm just so excited about the opportunities that brings. And that's us.
Brilliant.
Thanks very much.
It was really interesting to hear the whole lot, because obviously we have parts of that journey we know and others that we don't. But I was really intrigued to know how much do staff respond to how well do staff respond to the new types of environments they're now working in, and what's their level of interest in the sustainability story that sits around it?
Well, you should read out that message from yesterday.
Yeah, we did a sustainability roadshow in Norwich yesterday, which was lovely. How do I answer that? the London audience is harder to please generally in life, right?
In everything.
I think our regional offices have probably been most transformative in terms of what they were to what they are now. And probably the level of staff engagement in that storytelling, because it's part of their market, their geography. What we want to do is embed this stuff into our service lines. Being able to walk the walk rather than talk the talk is really, really helpful as part of that sales process. So I think different people get engaged in different things, and you know, some of it has been like the giving back or the business school stuff. We've got a bunch of assets we don't want anymore because it doesn't fit the new office. How can we give those the greatest asset value but also do good with them? That resonates with people. The material stories resonate with people, but I think it's a tangible example of us trying to live to our purpose, which generally cuts across most of our staff.
Rethinking our process, right? We talk about completion of a project and then say a soft landings period where people sort of get used to it. As part of that, we've also had to look at how can we implement storytelling sessions for local teams as every project goes live, and that goes beyond just the FM teams or the leadership of an office. We did it in Birmingham a couple of weeks ago. You know, you go and do a couple of days there in person. You explain what this material is. You know, this tabletop is made from recycled suits, for example, and people, oh, okay, I get it. You know, otherwise it's just a bit of a patterned surface. Explaining that.
I am being flippant, right? We did over 160 client tours of Water Street.
Wow.
In what, just over 12 months?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it is a showpiece. And I think when our head of sustainability, Guy Granger, go on his world travels, the first thing he gets asked is, well, what are JLL doing? So I think the workplace is familiar to everyone, right? Most people have got a workplace, an office. So being able to showcase what you're all about through that space just becomes really tangible and accessible.
But it's not just... Well, it is people like Guy being asked that. I was asked the same question from the Cambridge Institute of Sustainability Leadership. What is JLL doing in terms of inclusive design? And having spaces such as this to talk about that, but also say, look, we've tried to do this much. This is where we come against challenges. We need to put more thought into that. And we've seen it from Manchester to Water Street to Norwich to Glasgow to Birmingham and Leeds. So, our multi-faith spaces, for example, we've tweaked and tried to improve space by space by space. That seems to be in sync with how thoughts on, for example, inclusive design is moving forward. But it's great to be out in front on that and be able to participate in those conversations and be able to try it in practice rather than just in theory as well.
I guess you have a fortunate position in a sense in that you're working on a large property portfolio, so you can mine within your own portfolio. Yeah. From your personal perspective, what do you think needs to change? Because most a lot of end users say the biggest problem is timing. How do we find second life, be it furniture, be it materials in general? But equally, they don't future plan. What do you think what would be a game changer in your... I mean, that's a huge question and probably a little unfair. But.
Yeah, and I mean, look, a marketplace, like a national marketplace with regional distribution centres, everything connected via...
We're working on it.
Yeah. But, genuinely, I think it's about embedding these things as aspirations into projects, first of all. Yeah, if you go to a design team, say, we want to reduce embodied carbon, we want to maximise circularity on a fit-out, you communicate your intent, that gives you a chance. There are supply chains out there. It's not like there's nothing to go after. And at the moment, the corporate world is still consolidating their footprint. Yeah. So that's not going to last forever. So at the moment, it feels like it's probably easier at the moment than it has been. There's more suppliers coming through. You need to procure the right design partners as well, and construction partners. I think that's pretty crucial.
Yeah.
Feedback from ISG maybe in terms of there'll be more opportunities than you know.
Yeah, that was a good piece of intel. I think the key thing for me is that this can't be solved within the time frame, within the programme of a project. A lot of this thought has to be done outside of a project or in advance of a project. The challenge with that is who you're going to pay to do that thinking, because most people don't necessarily want to engage in that unless they're being paid to do that. We're lucky in that we are trying to do some of this thinking outside of our project because we've got repeat projects. But in truth, even though we've got a portfolio, we're still leaning into some of the same challenges. Sequencing, Water Street was unusual for us because it was delivered designed and delivered in the middle of the pandemic. We were able to decant out of one space. Everyone was working from home anyway. We were able to use that space as part of the logistics process. But otherwise, other projects, it's the same thing. With Water Street, a lot of the assets that went into it, we had to think about future reuse potential rather than what can we reuse from the get-go, because also we didn't have the opportunity to get out there in truth as a design team. We also didn't know who to talk to at that point. Where can we find some of this stuff? So we had to think about it in that sense. That's changing.
The world's moved on a lot in 3 years.
Yeah.
It really has shifted in this space. I mean, the other thing is the opportunities can come late. So today I've just had a call with the PM on our Leeds fit out. We've got a Corinth work surface in our existing office in a print space, saying, well, can we take that out of use now and use that as work surfaces in some of our care rooms that are going into the new Leeds fit out? Sequencing is a key challenge. The more time you have, can you shut your existing office for 4 weeks? Presents more opportunities. I guess COVID's been useful for that. It showed that businesses can operate without an office for a sort of a short period of time. It's not a panacea. We're on a journey, is how I'd respond, I think.
And even with that one example, that one example of the reused worktop, the conversation that we were having yesterday and this morning about that, Stuart showed the conflict matrix earlier. Great, we can reuse this worktop. Is there a challenge from an inclusive design / neurodiversity perspective? Yeah, there might be. What do we want to do? Weigh up that balance and then make a decision with that full set of information that we were talking about in terms of an appraisal matrix. That's really helpful. It means that a decision can be made within half an hour of receiving the email, basically, rather than deliberating over a number of days.
I think we are at a cusp. I sense it changing, but you mentioned about timber, and I agree with you entirely, but on the other hand, in some ways, if you throw that timber away, it feels even more, metal has a value. So it will get recycled, whereas timber won't.
We're not talking about recycling, though.
I agree with you, but that's the logic that I'm hearing.
But but if we use timber, it's reduced upfront embodied carbon, and it's demountable. We can take it to the next one.
So it has to be designed in that way. It still has to be designed for disassembly and reuse rather than being single-use timber.
Yeah. It's never one factor, and this is. I guess if I give one message here, it's so layered and so complex that you need time to make the right decisions. You need a framework for decision making, some broad principles around which people align, and then that allows you to travel quicker once you've got a design that's been developed.
Is that your one takeaway?
No,
because mine would then be, it is really complex, but you've got to start somewhere. And work it through as you move through.
I applaud you guys immensely. I think it's amazing the work you're doing. It's only through exemplar projects such as yours can people see the art of the possible.
But with humility, we've not nailed this at all.
Yeah.
Who has?
Thank you both. I'm a neurophysio, so I come from it. I love seeing you talk about the inclusive design, and I just wonder, have you seen a shift through your lens of accessible, inclusive design? We know we've got a globally ageing workforce. And we know that the range of hidden and other disabilities, but we know it's so much more than a ramp and a disabled toilet. So have you, in all your projects, seen a shift in the lens of what is inclusive design or accessible design?
So yes, PAT 6463, BS 15046, designing for menopause and menstruation. I mean, just in the last 18 months. We've, again, been on this journey for a while. So back in 2019, we started developing a UK inclusive workplace standard. That research informed an EMEA JLL diversity, inclusion and belonging standard, which we kind of apply as a baseline to our projects. But within the UK market, there's lots of research from Bureau Happold,
Harrop, Motion Spot, lots of people like that. So if we want to be market leading, we have to consider what's best practiced in that market. And yes, absolutely, it has increased in our own considerations, our own thinkings, our own ambitions in terms of inclusive design. And by that, I'm incorporating, designing for aging populations, neurodiversity, and so all of that stuff. Yeah, it really has. But also, as I mentioned earlier, for us, it's not only about designing for our people today, but setting a marker out there in terms of our recruitment strategy for the next 5-10 years. Where do we want to be? Who might we want to attract in 5 years' time? And that might justify a single use case space today.
We've got 8 business research groups as well that cover gender equity,
Yeah.
neurodiversity. You lead this work stream.
Gender balance, health and well-being, and disability, neurodiversity. There's the global network who are looking for race for change.
There's others.
Pride, building pride.
I'd like to say well done.
But they're consulted as part of the design process.
Yeah.
So we're not designing in a bubble. We're talking to our people, local office, but also key groups who might be not marginalised from the design process sometimes.
Thanks very much.